Thank you, Anna. I'm very excited for these talks. I'm delighted to introduce, is it Agnes or Agnes?
Agnes.
Agnes
You hear me?
Howard.
I'm okay, sound-wise?
Okay. Agnes Howard from Christ College in Valparaiso University in Indiana. And her talk is entitled Nobody Told Me, Proclaiming Ignorance, Explaining Natality. Thank you and welcome. I'm Agnes.
Thank you so much, Cassandra. And thanks, Anna, for this amazing event, for the launch of this symposium. As this symposium illustrates, we live in a time full of excellent writing on birth. I'd like to focus attention on one feature of some writing about birth that has surprised me, and that is its proclamations of ignorance. We hear this often in conversation about birth, but it's common in writing too. This claim that something was not told, something was not understood, and the writers, though expert in some respects, proclaim ignorance. More often than one might expect, women about birth frame their words with professions of their own failure, that they did not know, were not told, did not understand something crucial about the experience. These professions come off as practically obligatory, the expected way to present the reality that they did discover through maternal experience. I can give a few examples. Journalist Megan O'Connell, in her 2018 book, And Now We Have Everything, Motherhood Before I Was Ready, snaps during birth that she, quote, no longer related to whatever reasons she had for delivering naturally, perhaps because she never understood them in the first place, had not known before, quote, what the experience would be like, end quote. She admits, too, she did not know how hard it would be to breastfeed or how hard it was to get together with friends or to do many other things once she had a baby. New York Times columnist Jessica Gross opens her 2021 book, Screaming on the Inside, The Unsustainability of American Motherhood, by confessing her ignorance about a bunch of things, like medications during pregnancy or policies for parental leave. The well-regarded columnist, whose expertise is on family issues, admits on the first pages of her book, I felt deeply stupid when I realized this. Of all people, I should have known better. Lucy Jones, in her 2023 book, Matrescence, on pregnancy, childbirth, and motherhood, appears to be navigating, in contrast, an excess of information, which might be proof of the opposite of ignorance. But she admits that she had misunderstood what childbirth was, that she was confused by the mixed information she had about epidurals. She discovered that, quote, her knowledge of what birth actually entailed was scant. Her refrain while describing the risks of tearing, of postpartum injury is, I did not know. She says she was baffled by instruction on breastfeeding, where, quote, there is so little information about practicalities in her prenatal classes. She says later, and I think maybe most stunningly, given the character of this book, I did not know that my brain would undergo lasting, let alone significant structural changes in matrescence. Jennifer Banks, whose 2023 book Natality has been mentioned by a couple of people in this symposium so far, acknowledges her surprise to discover the term natality from Hannah Arendt. Banks, whose work in publishing brought contact with books on just about everything except birth, concedes that, quote, birth has been explored more extensively than I first imagined. But still, as she recounts her emotional response to dropping off her young daughter at daycare, she demands, quote, why did nobody tell me what this was like? Pardon me, why did no one tell me what this was like? Why did no one prepare me? Why did no one tell me implies that a batch of information exists, that others have it and should give it to the expectant woman at the right time. I want to puzzle over proclamations like this. First, taking them at face value, trying to understand why birthing people reasonably might feel that they were not given the right information. But after, I want to consider the expression of ignorance as a rhetorically potent, if not literal statement, as calling for a change in common understanding that these writers contribute to by telling us what nobody told them. This paper interprets proclamations of ignorance as protests against specific contemporary attitudes, that motherhood is sweet and easy and natural, and against long undervaluation of birth and motherhood. The distant past really may have left women untold what they would have wanted to know, and recent past may leave women misled. People who discover the human importance of motherhood only by doing it may regret broad ignorance of the physical, social, and cognitive facts of maternity, ignorance exacerbated by the implication that the only audience interested in these topics is young moms. So, first, history allows us to consider how ignorance actually could be or was a problem in the past. Women expecting babies in the past have had reason to claim that nobody told them what they needed to know before birth, either because, number one, because the knowledge was unavailable, or because what counted for knowledge was wrong or unhelpful. My time today only allows very brief look at history around birth understandings and practices to remind ourselves that in the past, the kind of knowledge that we presuppose is necessary for having a baby used to be unavailable. I'm looking predominantly at Europe and the United States, and my conversation here speaks primarily from experience in the US. To say people in the past did not have the information that we understand as necessary is, of course, not to say that they did not know anything about it. They had ideas that made sense within their own frameworks. Some practical knowledge was kept within the confines of women's spaces because it seemed obscene to tell the secrets of women out too broadly. But men were plenty involved in thinking and writing about birth because birth touches so many other significant areas of human understanding, human origins, human relationships to other animals, our anthropology, or even theology. Ancient Greek and Roman ideas about what they called human generation theorized that babies came from seeds. Aristotle theorized that men have seed and women don't. Aristotle's ideas came into competition later with Galen's, who insisted that both men and women have seeds. Of course, reproductive understanding varies a lot over a couple of thousand years, but pretty important and also pretty consistent in these theories is the assumption that the childbearing woman was understood to be doing relatively little in the process. Whether the fetus was made with one seed or two, growth in the fetus was thought to come from some immaterial force, from the fetus itself, or from man, or from God, or from all three, while the woman merely maintained nourishment and warmth around the womb. So there was a batch of information held by experts about how pregnancy and birth worked, but not exactly the kind whose knowing would have much helped mothers-to-be in the way we might want now. What was assumed about women's passivity, beyond avoiding harm to the fetus through what they saw, ate, or thought while pregnant, gave little motivation for prenatal telling. On the other hand, in some historical situations in the past, women would not be likely to lament that nobody told me that pregnancy felt like being sick, or that birth and new motherhood could be hard or painful. It would not be necessary for someone to tell women explicitly these things because proximity to those events made them more common knowledge. Women were likely to know from their own experience of approaching or surviving birth, but also from accompanying other women in their confinement or lying in around the time the baby came due. Social childbirth attended in private homes by other women sometimes can be romanticized, but it did offer onlookers education in how babies were made and what it was like to have one. If in some ways the conditions of knowledge restricted information about maternity, in other respects, social childbirth helped beat the nobody told me emotion by showing beyond telling what it actually was like. Expanded scientific knowledge moved birth further from women's social spheres to hospitals in the 19th and 20th century. Institutional medicine assumed authority over birth before doctors knew much more and sometimes knew much less about it than did midwives. When science did make available to medicine some consequential tools that laboring women would later come to rely on, like anesthesia, antiseptics, antibiotics, and later diagnostic imaging, these interventions further extended the assumption that women were mostly passive in the process of making and birthing a baby. The assumptions behind prenatal care began with the premise that doctors would tell women information and instructions. The implicit contract of prenatal care insisted on insisted that somebody medical in the United States, usually a doctor or a nurse, tells women things, and then women obey these directives in exchange for expectation of a healthy, happy period before a birth safely managed by those medical experts. In fact, it was resistance to medical management, to over-medicalization, that advanced the narrative of natural birth that now provokes some of the sharpest laments of ignorance among recent writers. Lucy Jones lays her unhappy ignorance most immediately at the door of natural birthing rhetoric. Jones charges that uncritical embrace of natural childbirth language, quote, led birth discourse too far into the realms of myth and misinformation. Jones admits, I felt dismayed by the expectations I had held. The unhappy surprise that labor and motherhood can be hard may be a kind of unintended consequence of some real victories of earlier women's health movements. De-emphasizing danger and pain was a significant component of birth reform, especially midwifery advocacy in the US in the late 20th century. In her advocacy of midwifery, Barbara Katz-Rothman acknowledges that deeming pregnancy healthy and normal is, quote, of course, politically necessary if midwives are to claim their competence to attend birth, so that physical discomforts are minimized as part of a normal, healthy pregnancy. The same movements promoting natural birth promoted dissemination of knowledge about birth. Because it's easy now to learn just about anything you would want to know about birth, claims of ignorance should sound discordant. If so much information circulates, why should women ever complain that they had not been told something? Again, note how claiming ignorance violates the conventions we have for the usual posture of the authority of a writer. It's not usually how we establish credentials to tell about something if we first confess how much we don't know or how ignorant we are, even recently, about this topic. Now, one might reasonably object that really telling the truth about birth is not possible, that maybe knowing what it's like to give birth or to tend a young child is like falling in love, or like dying, the kind of knowledge inaccessible to us until we are in it, or at best, known in a vague and detached way. That may be true to an extent. But we can know a good deal, and we can acknowledge that the situation is worth knowing about, even when not happening to us personally. We do this all the time for other kinds of situations. Information is plentiful, but perception of it limits access. More than in, say, earlier periods when modesty would have hidden away details of birth, the man on the street can now be presumed to know many things about birth. Sperm plus egg makes baby. The epidural helps it out. But what every man knows may tend to make him think the experience is in the purview of just the individuals who choose to do it, that it is happy and sweet, and that other particulars are not his problem. What then might writers' proclamations of ignorance be telling this person, the man on the street, the reader, neither pregnant nor very interested in it? At a pretty immediate level, nobody told me may name one's own failure and may also cast blame at someone else, someone who failed to tell. But in writing about birth, the accusation rarely targets a particular person, a mother, a friend, or a doctor, or a nurse, or a midwife, and instead seems to regret the broad public conditions that would require anyone to have to tell a woman this in order for her to know it at the right time. We might read, nobody told me, as no one should have had to tell me. Natality should have been obvious to me all along, and also obvious to you. This figure of speech creates the rhetorical occasion to remedy the problem it identifies. The phrase implies its own corrective. Nobody told me, so I am telling you. Since we know that these writers are not ignorant, but are using proclamations of ignorance for some other reason, we could read them instead to be saying something like this. Because nobody told me how astonishing it is that the human body works this way, making space for a new human and retrofitting one's own organs to provide for and protect that new one, I will tell you. Or, because nobody told me childbearing can be physically and psychologically difficult, I am telling you, so that expectant mothers might not feel isolated or deviant, so that we all admit that the body and brain change in profound ways in service of a new person, and so that other people around new mothers stand ready to help. Or because nobody told me that caring for young children involves paying attention to the embodied fact of human existence that opens the mind, I am telling you, so that we can appreciate the beginning of our own existence, how you and I and everyone else came to be. So we respect those trained by caregiving's experience to see particular connections between one person's embodiment and another's. Especially through their use of less familiar terms like natality or matrescence. These writers may aim to translate the staggering reality of human reproduction beyond already interested audiences. It might be best to see women writing about natality not as breaking this news mostly to young mothers of childbearing age, already worried about the dangers of tuna fish or cat litter, but you, the reader in the street. Look, they say. These proclamations of ignorance are a way to signal, maybe a way to reach beyond, over, or around this primary audience, mothers or mothers-to-be, to reach to another audience, to tell more of us something that we all should know, to tell all of us something that should be so well known as not to be told just at the right moment to a person whose life condition brings her to shop for nursery furniture. Nobody told me is not a wish to go back in time so that somebody would tell me, but it is a claim on the future that those who had to learn by doing can persuade readers that natality matters, that a human event of this magnitude become the kind of thing other people just know about. Women writing well about these topics are testifying to this, that natality is the kind of knowledge that humans cannot afford to have come as a surprise, or come too late, or to never learn at all. Thank you.